Good. Good song, Ron. Okay, we are ready to start. And welcome everybody to the Contemporary Issues class on October Sunday morning. And we are going to have a good discussion today about ballot issues on the election ballot, and with Ron Puning presenting today. But first, we're going to do our usual announcements. In your lower left corner of your screen is a little icon that says mute. If you would click that so we can control the background noise better. If you're not muted, I can mute you also. And we are recording this class for future playback, so please be aware of that. And also, please be kind to our speaker and to each other. And any other announcements? Lois was just telling us that Connie is in need of prayers, so we'll keep her in our thoughts and prayers today.
Great, thank you.
And you bet. And several people said before we started they've got their ballots already. So we are being pretty timely with this. And actually, probably today we are going to excuse me just a second. What, Vicki? We got ours in the mail too. My wife just told me, so that's good.
Yeah, I got mine.
Good. And we are not going to talk today about candidates because there's so many candidates, and you can look up them on your on their websites for information. We thought today that it would be most helpful if we talked about the ballot questions, since there's quite a few, 11. And a little discussion would help clarify in our minds how to do that. So hopefully you have your blue ballot book that you got from the state. You have a chance to look at that. So we'll have a good talk. With that, I give you Ron Puning, our book reviewer and our political activist and retired engineer. So Ron, thanks for this today.
Good. Hopefully, you'll all be able to make up your mind, like the Love and Spoonful song. Say yes to one and let the other be mine. But we, of course, have both amendments and propositions. Amendments were put on there by the legislature. Often the legislature will debate an issue, decide that they're open to what the citizens want and really don't want to force their political views, and they'll put an amendment on the ballot. We've got at least 4, and then propositions are from bottoms up citizen groups that get enough petition signatures to get something on as a proposition. Okay, a little bit of propaganda as we start. We had as a speaker Chris Stifler several times, and he, of course, is part of the Colorado Physical Institute. Talked about the Purple Book, and I've got the Purple Book from 2018. There'll be another edition hopefully coming out for this year. A quick note, a little personal prejudice coming in here. I call it the unbridled free market. Do we have total free markets, or do we have socialism or something in between? I like to think of it as a horse that needs a bridle. Society. If the bridle's too tight, you stop the free market from doing the things that it should and can do. If you don't bridle the horse, if you just let the free market go by itself, it will do what Uncle Scrooge is doing in that upper cartoon, which is dive in the money bin and make decisions only on the basis of monetary and other kinds of interest. So you need some balance between the two. Also, a little opinion on what are wise laws. Wise laws don't excessively lock out flexibility. See that? What would Gumby do? You want some flex and bend in most of your laws. The Gallagher Amendment is an example of a very inflexible law. It calls for a 45-55 split. We'll talk about that in a couple minutes. It's important to set pollution limits that can be adjusted and can adapt to new technologies or realities of what's happening. You want to set tax rates that can be adjusted, hopefully. A good example is if you're building highways, which we're trying to do right now. Highways and the cost of highways is very much determined by the cost of cement, concrete, rebar, asphalt, gravel, and you pay for construction workers. And if you just adjust your tax rate or gasoline tax based on inflation factors, they may not accurately reflect what real costs for building highways are. And then, of course, laws have to be flexible enough to account for unknowns, particularly bad unknowns like hurricanes, floods, wars, and certainly pandemics like right now. Also coming out of the Purple Book was data from 2016 on the income inequality. If quintiles are basically dividing the population into 5 groups of 20%. So quintile is 20%. And we can see that the highest 20% of Coloradans have almost half of the income. And then the next 20% has another 23%. So you can really see where the top 40% has, most control of the income. And the top 5% has at least 22% of the income. So we have to keep that in mind as we write laws and think of society. Another personal interest of me, I always felt that college was my door to being able to earn a living and have a career. And I'm very disappointed to say we rank 47th in state support for higher education. And right now, here's a plot over the years, and it shows how the state share started dropping around 2000, where the state used to pick up almost 70% of tuition and college costs, and now it's down to 35%. So there's no question this has closed the door on a lot of middle class, particularly, and other lower middle class and even the poor, trying to get into college. So that's another one. So let's plunge right into the amendments. And the first one I'm going to bring up is Amendment B. And in some respects, it's maybe the most complex of the that's Gallagher Amendment. Let's jump ahead. Basically, the Gallagher Amendment says that the property tax has to be 55% from non-residential, that's businesses, oil and gas, things like that, and 45% from residential. The Gallagher Amendment has been around for more than 20 years now. The problem we're having with it is, again, it's an inflexible law. It locked in that ratio of 55 to 45. And as you've all known, particularly those that own homes or whatever in Denver and Colorado in general, residential properties have gone up a great deal in value. Non-residential properties have gone up some, but nothing like what we've seen for residential. So what's happened is every time the residential value goes up and the taxes from it tend to go up, the state has had to step in and cut the tax rate to keep residential from going over 45%. And that is particularly killing a lot of rural areas, small towns, rural Colorado, particularly things like fire departments or a library if they have one, emergency services, some medical care facilities. And so that inflexibility of holding that 45 to 55 ratio is a killer. So Amendment B is to repeal Gallagher and allow the residential tax rates, like on my home right here, to float up a little bit at the future, not be decreased down further and further. It's trying to hold the residential tax base high enough so that schools, fire departments, police, all those kind of things that depend on a lot of residential tax rates don't get smeared, which is what's happening to them right now. Whoops. And here's an example in this graph. It shows the year in the left-hand column and the assessment rate on residential property. And you can see where it's gone from 21% at the inception of Gallagher down to its current 7.2%. And note the text below it. The impact of Gallagher varies widely between regions. The residential assessment rate is raised based on the statewide values, but the growth in value out, particularly in the rural areas, can really get clobbered by what's happening to property values on the state average. So comments. I'm not a super expert on Gallagher. Again, it's a very, very complex rule, but I think you can say there's pretty good bipartisan support to repeal Gallagher. Gallagher and Tabor are kind of kissing cousins in a way. Gallagher is the more severe of the two in terms of its flexibility, and there is good support on both sides of the aisle to repeal Gallagher. So comments from all you folks out there. How do you feel about Gallagher, and what's your take on it?
Ron, this is Missy Kaut. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Maybe the overarching issue here is not so much Gallagher versus non-Gallagher, but whether or not these types of provisions that have fixed numbers should be in the Constitution at all. Should these not be in the state statutes or local equivalents as opposed to a fixed entity such as the Constitution? The Constitution was not originated to be a numbers gathering vehicle. It really was to provide overall requirements for the good of the people. So I think that's really the major argument here.
Okay. Again, it gets back to locking in numbers. I think we all know on our personal budgets, you wouldn't want to rule on your personal budget saying you've got to spend, you can't spend more than 8% on food and clothing. You can't spend more than so much on utilities. Times and things can change, and you need that flexibility to adjust to changing demographics and changing state economics.
This is Terry. This is Terry. I have a question. My question is, in the state of Colorado, we're required to balance our budgets. And what I see what happens is that in poor times, we reduce all these various funds for schools and colleges and everything. But when the economy comes back up, we're not able to restore what we had been previously spending on these various areas without the voter approving the increases. Is that still correct?
Partially. Tabor does allow some increase for population and things like that. But it's also true that it doesn't, if you get a 10% cut in your salary and come back 3 years later and get a 10% increase, you've lost, because the percent is based on different numbers. So it's true. Of course, that's more Tabor related than Gallagher related. I think we should make sure we separate the two. This is Gallagher, strictly Gallagher we're working on.
Ron,
Uh-huh.
Ron, it's my understanding that Amendment B does have a cap on the percentage, however, because without a cap, you have what happened in California, where as property gets more and more valuable, you'll have the old folks priced out of their houses without some sort of a cap on property taxes. And it's my understanding that Amendment B does maintain a cap. So people who are fearful that if you take away this 45, 55, that they might not be able to afford to stay in their houses, I don't think that's a problem. Because isn't the cap like 7% or something?
Yeah, again, I'm not the super expert on it, but we can see just from the graph, the assessment rate has driven down substantially. It will probably, if Gallagher repeal passes, it will probably lock in that 7.2%.
Right, that's my understanding.
It locks in a 715, which is the current.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, any more on Gallagher? We'll jump to the next one then. Amendment C, conduct of charitable gaming activities. That lady's just won her on her bingo card there. It basically allows charitable organizations that have been in the state for, right now you got to be in the state for 5 years. And who is aware of who's doing bingo? I know the Catholic Church back in Cincinnati used to do some bingo operations. I'm not sure who in Colorado is the runners of bingos, but basically it allows a charitable organization to hire an outside entity, a manager, to run their bingo and maybe squeeze more profit from the bingo. It allows them to pay the bingo workers more, hire a manager, and get a third party involved to a great extent on bingo.
Ron, just include raffle in your frame of reference. It's not just bingo, it's raffles.
Raffle, right.
Which is a big increasing operation.
Okay. So what are the thoughts from you folks out there? What's your thought on whether we loosen up the rules on bingo raffle or keep them as is? Any strong opinions? Okay, I don't think this is one of the more contentious ones, and I think there's people on both sides of it.
If you hire people to run these games, then there's going to be the payroll issue, and the state will get a percentage. You know, their what's due to them. So as of right now, they're not getting that.
Okay.
The state is not. So
okay.
There's payroll issue.
And an argument against is that it will decrease the amount going to the nonprofit because, and professionalize the gaming.
Okay. All right, I'm going to jump to the next one, Amendment 76, and the language is rather intriguing. I think most people say the intent of this is really to shut off the ability of some 17-year-olds voting in the primary. Right now, if you're 17 years of age when the primary comes around, but you will turn 18 by the general election, they're allowing 17-year-olds to vote in the primary. Not in the general election, but in the primary. So this rule would knock out the 17-year-olds' ability to, some of the 17-year-olds being able to vote in the primary. So it's a mild voting restriction, but it is a further voting restriction in general being applied here. Comments? I'll tip my hand. I'm all for young people voting, so I want them to be able to vote as soon as they can. They can't screw things up any worse than we have.
Well, it seems like nowadays young people, like all the high school kids, know a lot more about what we're voting on than a lot of adults that I talk to. Like my 17-year-old, he's 18 now, but he was able to vote. He knows everything that I don't know about the government and all that, you know. Seem like they're really up on it, so why can't they vote? I mean, if he's 17 turning 18, which he did, then he voted before he went off to college. Yeah. So it seems okay to me. They seem to know what it's all about, and they're living it.
Okay.
Ron, I have a
So read the ballot carefully. If you want 17-year-olds and the youth to vote, you want to vote no on 76.
Oh,
So a no vote on 76 says, yes, let the 17 and a halves vote like they can right now.
Ron, what is the implication of the change in language from every to only citizen?
That's the big thing.
Again, in both cases, you must be a citizen of the United States to vote. It doesn't change that. It just impacts this this age bracket issue.
It seems to be an unnecessary change.
Doesn't have anything to do with immigrants, yeah.
I
Ron,
see
what's
no
the current-
need for reducing the opportunity to vote. Seems to me we should be increasing it.
Okay.
But it's in the primary, it's not the general.
Ron, do you know what the current status of immigrants to vote is?
They can't.
Are undocumented immigrants allowed to vote in Colorado?
Nope.
Okay, just wondering.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one. Who's that man? And that's Kenny Rogers as the gambler. And this is one that I don't think there's a strong partisan divide on. It gives the citizens in those gambling communities, Black Hawk, Central City, Cooper Creek, local voting ability to approve new games, bet limits, and it talks about putting the taxes from these gambling profits into community college. So it's turning more of the control, not all the control over gambling, but a little more of it, it's being, the ability to control it, it's being put in the hands of the small towns and cities that have the gambling. Thoughts and opinions from the peanut gallery there?
Ron, I don't like this one because it's the vested interest of these small towns to increase their business. So they want all kinds of new games and new limits. But when gambling first, unlimited stakes gambling first got approved, it was, it's only going to be a small thing. Now we're going to turn these three towns into Las Vegas is my read of this one.
Okay. Sports gambling has also soared in popularity.
Yeah.
Of course, you can do that online.
Hey, Ron,
I don't like the idea of increasing the bet limits. We have too many people that get themselves into trouble gambling.
Okay.
it seems to me this is about local control versus statewide determination. And I don't know that I have a strong opinion or informed opinion about gambling limits and that sort of thing. So I'm inclined to vote yes on this amendment, given that these local communities are going to have to deal with the consequences. And I'm not sure what the implications are for statewide online stuff, but this certainly affects what's going on in Black Hawk and Central City and so on.
Well,
What goes on there affects the rest of the state.
No, this is because a previous constitutional amendment gave these towns the ability to have gambling. And so the only way you can amend that original constitutional amendment to give these areas the right to gamble is to be able to amend this so they can change how they do that. This is why it shouldn't even be in the Constitution, but it is, and this is why you have to vote on it.
All right, we better move
This
on.
is Terry. This is Terry. I'd like to make
Okay.
one quick comment.
Sure.
The reason they want to raise the limit is because the gamblers go to the places that will be outside our state that have a higher rate. And it doesn't really tell you this, but they want you to stay here in Colorado rather than going to Wyoming or into Iowa where they have unlimited, and to Vegas and these places, is to keep the gamblers here.
Okay, good point. All righty. Double E is the putting a higher tax on cigarettes and tobacco, and including vaping products in the tax code. Right now, I think you can sell vaping products with no special sin tax. So this would put more tax, put a tax on vaping products, and it's argued this might help cut it back on the teenagers being addicted by vaping products in particular. But it's definitely a sin tax on smoking, vaping, things like that. Any thoughts out there?
I'm all for sin taxes.
Okay.
I think not having the taxing on all the vaping that is sprung into action is a missed opportunity for raising funds.
But will adding taxes on vaping cut down teenage vaping?
Well, I hope so if they have to put up much more money for those products. That's the whole idea. It's trying to reduce the use of nicotine products for health reasons.
Okay. So read carefully. If you want to put a tax to vaping products, you want to increase the sin taxes, vote yes on EE. Okay.
Yeah, the one thing about vaping, the one thing about vaping is that there has been a lot of conversation saying that this is harmless, etc. And it's produced by people who are running or selling tobacco products and everything, and it's not harmless. This is an addictive substance, and it is very harmful to people's health, which is a deterrent for the country's health. I can't see any reason why they are not included in the tobacco the way that everybody else is. The other things are.
All right. I've put up a map. This is from electoral-vote.com. It was pulled off the internet last night. This shows the current projection by electoral-vote.com of where they think the election stands right now. But more importantly, it shows how many electoral votes each state and the District of Columbia has. Notice the District of Columbia has 3 electoral votes, but no senators. But this is determined by, here's the formula to get the electoral votes for a state. You get 1 electoral vote for each congressional district. And of course, your number of congressional districts is determined by population, although that population is based on the last census. That means states that have grown a whole lot in the last 8 or 10 years are underrepresented, whereas states that are losing population or holding their population steady, like West Virginia, still have more proportional power than they probably should. But you get 1 vote for each congressional district plus 2. The 2 is the number of senators you have. So you can see where that plus 2 gives small and rural, predominantly rural states a bit of an edge by getting that bonus 2. In other words, Wyoming, with its very low population, gets an added 2, and California and Texas only get an added 2 as well. So it gives very small states a disproportionate package. Basically, this popular vote thing, it's a pact between a whole bunch of states. And it basically says the following: if we get enough states with 270 electoral votes, and that's what you need to win, signing the pact saying they'll throw their votes to the popular vote winner, then and only then would this kick into effect. That would effectively make it such that there is a popular vote winner of the presidency. We've had 2 examples in the last 20 years of the popular vote winner not getting the presidency. Al Gore won by 500,000 votes. That's a good number. Hillary won by 3 million votes. That's an even bigger number. Nonetheless, even being the winner, they were denied the presidency. And it could happen again. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but it could definitely happen again in the future. And some of us, me included, don't like elections where the guy with the most votes doesn't win. Think of it a 10-story office building where each floor has, let's say for now, the same number of people. But suppose on the floors 1 through 3, one candidate wins 90-10. But on the other 7 floors, the other candidates wins them all by about 5 votes. So the popular vote goes one way, but the electoral vote can and does greatly distort what the real results were. In the last election, Donald Trump won by almost 100 or more electoral votes. It was a very high number, and yet he had lost the popular vote by 3 million votes. So some people say, well, let's give small, and particularly rural states more power. By the way, in the Senate, each state, of course, gets 2 senators. The 9 most populous states get 18 senators. The rest of the states get, with the other 50% of the population, get 82 senators. So half the population gets 18 senators. The other half the population gets 82 senators. That blows my mind, and it certainly, it's so unfair as to be enough to make you puke, to put it bluntly. But that's the way the system was set up. The Electoral College is not as bad as the Senate. Nonetheless, it doesn't reflect the popular vote. So thoughts out there.
This is a tough one for me because I think there's good arguments on both sides. I think the founding fathers had a good idea of not allowing the candidates to just pander to the big cities where all the population is, and to force them to consider all areas. But I like the idea too of the majority vote gets the winner. So it's a tough thing. I wondered if anybody had anything better to solve that.
Well,
Sure,
I've
Dave,
got
go ahead.
an approach I think it is preferable, but I'm not sure it's workable. And that is what you ought to do is take the proportion that you get in a given state, like Colorado or Montana, the proportion that each candidate gets that proportion of the electors, and you round up to a whole electorate, okay? And that would mean that each state contributes its popular winner, and the end product of that would be the overall national one would be more fair. The reason I think they're going the way they've done is because I think it's unworkable. Look how long they've been working at this one. And it's not going to be over even no matter what we do. Okay. And so it may die a natural death. Okay. But because we can't get even this is a simpler one to explain to our population, which I think is an important dimension. But I'd really like to see proportional allocation by state, and then you aggregate that up, and that comes closer to what I think would be the ideal from both sides.
I can see the issue of making sure that the small states and population aren't forgotten, but I think we are way out of balance, not only in the Senate, but in the Electoral College. Right now, we've got a situation where the tail is wagging the dog.
I don't think the founding fathers, if you look at I don't have the data in front of me, but if you look at the state population of the original 13 colonies, the ratio between the biggest 2 or 3 and the smallest 2 or 3 population-wise was not that big. Right. Now we have a case where Wyoming has, how many people is it? As few as 330,000? Yeah, but they've got as much senatorial power as California. So I don't think the founding fathers ever anticipated how big the cities would get.
Good point.
Disproportionate, the size of the states would become.
Yeah. This is Terry.
I'd like
to make a quick comment on that. Nebraska and Massachusetts splits the electoral votes, and Nebraska did it so that Omaha and Lincoln couldn't run the state. It's not a winner take all in those 2 states.
I think they split it according to congressional districts.
That's correct.
And I think Maine did the same with their, with theirs. So
I think there may be 5 states that split it still. I could be wrong. But one of the things that has changed is the mass media. We've got television, things that candidates can appeal to rural states. They are currently focusing their attention on a small number of states, those that are called swing states, and appealing to that particular state's concerns, like fracking in Pennsylvania, for example. That's where a lot of votes are hanging in Pennsylvania. But with this amendment, I think it would be much more a general election and not limiting attention to these swing states only.
Sure. All righty.
You also have the issue that this may never go forward. The reason being, this is actually an interstate compact, and the Supreme Court is divided on whether or not an interstate compact needs congressional approval. But if in fact this does go and the number of states, go ahead and support this, it'll still face more than likely a Supreme Court ruling as well as congressional consent. So you have a number of blocks there that are still ahead that have to be decided.
Yeah, many have said that trying to get the number bumped from 196 to 270 is an almost insurmountable hurdle. There's a lot
But the
of
other
states
option
that
is to change the Constitution.
Yes, but that would require a constitutional convention,
It would.
which is a can of worms. Nobody.
Energy, sure.
But this is also a can of worms in that even if we get above all the hurdles that Missy's talking about and we get the 270, you've got lots of questions like what happens then after, okay, we hit 270 and then some state like Colorado, which has already voted to join, puts on the ballot and overturns it and we unjoin. I mean, what happens then? So it's the best we can do and I'm voting for it, but it's just an unbelievable can of worms.
Okay, we better move on. We're running a little low on time here. Okay, the wolves. How do you all feel about the wolves? Should we bring them back by a state plan to reintroduce a management, or you want to protect Little Red Riding Hood and not let the big bad wolf in?
Yeah. Hmm.
Bring them back.
What
As
is there anything in this bill that says anything about compensation to farmers that lose livestock?
Yes, there is.
Yes, that's part of
Yes,
it.
there
Well,
is.
that's part of it.
That's worked in the other states, isn't it?
Yeah, the 3 states that have got wolves, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, their total, they lose about 300 livestock a year. That's lambs, calves, things like that. They do get
Well,
compensated.
how do wolves help I mean, what is the advantage of having the wolves?
They
I mean,
help
I don't know.
they help the balance of nature.
Oh,
There-
There's a
I don't know
wonderful-
whether many of you remember, but a few years ago, Rocky Mountain National Park had to have higher open season going on and culling the elk herds that were overpopulating and overgrazing Rocky Mountain National Park to the point where it was threatening all of the trees and everything like that. And wolves where wolves have been reintroduced, the ecology actually blooms because of the grazing of elk and deer is reduced. So
I
there's a-
don't think it's a good idea because we're already competing with the mountain lions when we go hiking and that stuff, and we don't need to cull human beings. Deer Creek Canyon right now is closed because there's a mountain lion on the loose that is attacking people. We don't need to have wolves attacking anybody that hikes through our forests or camps or any of that stuff. It'll make it very unsafe for the rest of us.
I don't
Barry,
think-
with all due respect, I disagree very strongly. The number of mountain lion attacks that have taken place in the last 20 to 50 years is so minimal as to make it ridiculous. And the fact that mountain lions do help to cull the deer herds and the other grazing animals, so that the herds do not become overpopulated, et cetera. Mountain lions are part of the ecology, and we are really the interlopers here. We're the ones that are causing the problems. So I really disagree about that.
If any of you, there's a wonderful video on Yellowstone that shows how wonderfully positive the change in the environment was, the entire ecology, when they reintroduced wolves. Watch that video and you will vote yes for this. I don't see.
This
how
is
you-
Terry. I used to backpack in Wyoming, in the Yellowstone area, and you can't do it anymore because of the bears and the buffalo. You cannot hike and backpack in the Yellowstone area like we used to. It's like making a whole state open range We might as well turn the buffalo and everybody loose and everywhere in the state.
I think it's the grizzly bear that's the greatest threat to people wandering out. Okay, we need to move on here. Here's a very sensitive subject. Proposition 115. Colorado is one of 7 states that has very liberal abortion laws. 115 proposes to prohibit an abortion after 22 weeks. It does allow, I think, one exception, that being when there's an immediate need to save the life of a woman. Other than that, it says don't have abortions after 22 weeks, whereas full term is 36 weeks. And the penalties are directed at the person who performs the abortion, I think, more than the not the woman getting the abortion. So here's a hot potato. Any thoughts out there?
Well, it's still taking a human life.
Ron,
I think there's restrictions that need to be, I don't like this because of the way it's written. As a nurse, I will tell you that there are situations that it's not just the life of the woman. And so I think it's poorly written. I think it's limiting. And as a nurse, I would definitely vote against it.
Okay.
I'm familiar with one of the bad consequences. After 22 weeks, if the baby dies, the woman must carry that pregnancy to termination. She cannot go to a doctor and have what would be a clean procedure to remove that dead baby. And if somebody did that under this new regulation, that doctor could be penalized.
Okay.
Well, I think it should be rewritten so that if the baby dies, that they can safely remove the baby.
Well, that's not the way it's written.
Well, it should be.
My thought is, I think we just need to leave this issue with the woman and the people that are close to her. I don't want to see laws that reach into other people's business.
That's right.
You're here.
I have even though I do not approve of abortion personally, I feel like we get into dangerous territory when we try to politicize or go into personal human rights issues. And then I have an issue. I think it's very presumptuous of us to decide what a woman's situation is and with her baby. So for that reason, I don't like the way this is written at all. So Ron, what do you suggest we do?
Follow your conscience. Personally, there was a movie, Black Like Me. If I could be a woman for a week, I think I'd get some different perspectives. I tend to be, I'm going off on a tangent here and dodging the issue, but I think there needs to be intensively more legal birth control put into place. I think that helps, but I do believe the woman should have the right to make that ultimate decision, whether I agree with it or not.
Concerns about the life of the child. That's a child still inside that woman.
Yeah, at what point? That's the question. Is it at, for example, if the egg is fertilized and it doesn't attach to the embryonic wall until I think the 7 to 9 day point, and then even beyond that, then it's a gray area. When do you consider human life to begin?
This is about a 4-week discussion. Could we move on to the next one?
Yeah. Okay.
Good discussion, guys.
Okay, this is a hot one.
Good discussion, everybody.
Okay. Here's
Thanks
one.
for being civil.
Proposition 116, state income tax reduction. This proposes to flat out change the state income rate 4.63 to 4.55. For most Coloradans, certainly those in the lower 3 quintiles, it would be $50 or less in refund. It would be some pretty substantial deductions for those in the very high income brackets.
According to the state some state economists, that this one was put on the ballot to confuse the issue with another proposal that didn't make the ballot.
Okay.
That would have made taxes progressive, and it's pure politics. It will not really affect the budget in the long run.
Okay.
So economists are thinking a no vote is appropriate.
Okay.
Our state budget is in difficult situation right now because of COVID anyhow.
Yeah.
And this would just add to the misery.
Okay. Proposition 117, requiring voter approval for certain new state enterprises. What's a state enterprises? This is right out of the Blue Book. How many enterprises would Proposition 117 have affected? And this shows. If something is a enterprise, it does not fall under the Tabor limit. If it is an enterprise, or I'm sorry, if it's not an enterprise, it falls under Tabor. So in essence, if you put fewer things as enterprises and require voters to approve everything that might become an enterprise, you are effectively putting more things under Tabor, which is putting a stranglehold on most state programs. Higher education, roads, a lot of things are going to be getting, like a frog in a boiling water, are getting clobbered slowly and steadily by Tabor. I know, so if you want more Tabor and a tighter Tabor, you want to vote yes on this. If you're not fond of Tabor, you want to vote no on 117. Comments out there?
Yeah. I think you summed it up nicely, Ron.
Okay. Okay, and the last one we're going to do is 118, the paid family and medical leave insurance. This would be, if you're employed in Colorado, you would have another item on your paycheck deduction with a very small amount of money being paid by both the employer and the employee to put it into something called the Family and Medical Leave Program. What do you get in return? You get, if you had a family medical leave situation, you would get up to 12 weeks of medical leave insurance benefits starting in January 2024. So it's like a little medical Social Security program, you might call it, a medical insurance program. So it is something that the employer has to pay a share, you have to pay a share, but the employee does get a distinct benefit. So thoughts on this one?
Most Western civilized nations have something similar to this, Ron.
Okay. Okay. You know, one thing I'm concerned about is families are much smaller right now, and not that that's not good, but it's tough being a parent and trying to raise a family, raise kids, and our society is not nearly as friendly to raising children and moms and young parents as a lot of the European societies. A lot of the European societies give much more liberal pregnancy benefits, medical benefits, help that if you have sick children or spouses. So a lot of it's your viewpoint on how liberal of government programs should you have.
There's all, yeah, what you're talking about is the Nordic plan of the countries in the Nordic area. They're taxed at about 56% overall. And when you have issues like, say, the pandemic, those tax revenues that normally come in are not coming in. And as a result, these programs become quite endangered. So you have to look at the long term. You know, is it something that's guaranteed? No, it's not. And, you know, we've gone through a lot of ups and downs in our revenue bases for the state and for the country. So we need to take that into consideration as well.
I think those of us who would encourage family bonding, I think this has a very positive effect on health and well-being of families in Colorado, especially the new parents.
Okay.
Does the new father get 12 weeks off as well as the new mother?
Yep.
Yes.
Interesting.
My one comment on this is would a tax of 1% on wages cover the cost of 12 weeks? I assume they get 12 weeks of their full pay, or what do they get? Do they get 12 weeks of a certain set amount? And if the 1% doesn't cover it, where does the rest of the money come from?
I think it's from a state insurance fund.
Which has to be funded by the state.
Well, the employers and employees feed in, and I don't know who makes up the difference.
I'm guessing they may have to adjust the rates up and down a little bit depending on the number of claims. I'd have to read the details.
It's like, you know, unemployment insurance. The employee pays in, the employer pays in, and then the state pays in. So I'm assuming it would be something along those lines. I did human resources for years, and that's the way, you know, that one came through.
All righty. Well, that's oh, and then on local levels, like in Littleton, we have 4C, which is a school levy to try to get some more money to the Littleton Public Schools. Certainly, schools are getting clobbered by the loss of income and the cutbacks from state level funds. And are there any other folks in other districts in our church congregation or in a school district?
Same thing is true with Cherry Creek schools. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, our daughter's a teacher in Littleton, and she said that Colorado has now fallen from 48th in terms of funding schools to 50th.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
We're just
Keep
not
going
putting
lower.
our money where it needs to go.
Yeah,
Chuck, is that for higher ed or is that for overall education?
overall.
Yeah, the number I quoted in an earlier slide was higher education, but our primary and secondary education, I know we were in the 40s in terms of the state rankings, like 40 something, 45th or whatever.
Well, there's 45th or 50th, nothing to be proud of. Yeah.
That is based only on the state contribution, so we would be higher if we looked at the amount per student.
Okay.
So where higher ed is getting hit, interestingly enough, is the fact that our international student population, which pays even higher than out-of-state tuition, is gone down probably 60 to 80%. And this alone is contributing to a major immediate crisis in terms of university funding.
Okay, I can believe that.
We are about over time now.
Okay.
One quick question, if I could, to our attorneys that are joining us here. What about the judges' performance evaluations in the back of the Blue Book? Should we trust those as being really our best way to determine if a judge should be retained or not?
I went through all of the judges, and as opposed to last year when there was one or two that were not recommended, they were all recommended this year, and they had substantial support from both lawyers and that were in front of those judges, as well as the non-lawyers.
Great, thank
No,
you.
there was
one
here.
exception.
There was an exception in here.
Yeah, right, but it doesn't apply to me, to us, because we're in
Adams
Adams
County.
Ranch.
Oh, I see. what you
Exception
mean.
is in Sedgwick County.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, there is one
right.
exception.
Yeah, but that was
About
the
the
only
only-
exception, whereas there are a couple of exceptions last year, so.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so it was very difficult for me to try to make a judgment of no for somebody just because I didn't have anybody in that category. But I just wanted to share that with everybody else, that I looked at all of them that applied to us. Now that's going to be different for depending on what district you're in.
And Steve and Ron, you mentioned about the League of Women Voters Guide.
Uh-huh.
I found this at the Douglas County Library. You can pick them up there, and I imagine the Arapahoe Library District has them as well, but they're a little bit more user-friendly than the Blue Book.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot better.
Steve sent out
Right, yeah.
the Colorado League of Women Voters guide. It's online. You can get it.
And it's online too, right?
Thank you, Ron, for leading a great discussion. And I don't think we came to a consensus on everyone, but we've got some guidance, so that's good. Good luck, everybody, in voting your conscience. And next week, we were going to have Mark Feldmeyer, but scheduling changes have delayed that. He's going to pick another date, so we'll see what to do and let you know about next Sunday.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Good luck with your voting.
Thank you.
Take care. See you next week.
Okay.